Hello people, Ben here, and I am going to turn a thin client into a retro gaming computer, which sounds completely arbitrary because, well, it is. I wanted to set up a system for retro PC gaming after watching videos on Phil's Computer Lab, and was fascinated by the various thin client options he presented. I eventually settled on an HP T5720 thin client. Why? 1. I wanted something that would fit in easily in my retro computing station. 2. This HP thin client in particular has pretty decent specs for what I wanted, combined with an expansion module for a PCI card slot. 3. I also appreciate small form factor computers. They're lovely. My plan was to set this up for Windows 98 and DOS gaming, but there was a change in plans as will be seen in a bit. The thin client came with a Wi-Fi card, like I'm going to use that. The system still has labels from its previous place. This one in particular amuses me greatly and I'm keeping it. This device is not a PC and will not work outside of this building. It runs Doom off a DOS USB drive. Yeah, that went from 0 to Doom before I even installed an OS on here. Anyway, there is still some additional hardware needed for this system. A Yamaha sound card, SD card with IDE to SD adapter, USB optical drive from iOmega of all companies, and let's not forget the IDE cable. Hardware installation was pretty straightforward, aside from the IDE adapter. In this clip here, it turns out I plugged the IDE adapter the wrong way, which shouldn't be possible, but this cheap IDE cable made it otherwise. After getting the SD card detected in the BIOS, it was time to prepare the installer for Windows 98 SE. I opted for a USB install with Easy2Boot. Due to how Easy2Boot copies the Windows CD image and RAM for the install, the CD image has to be trimmed down. I started out by extracting the files and removing the unnecessary files for installation, then used ImageBurn to make an ISO out of these files, and copied the slim ISO to the flash drive. The thin client booted right up and I told Easy2Boot to load the Windows 98 image. This took a while to copy the RAM, but after that, it didn't work. I tried to create a slim ISO with Ultra ISO, and same result. After some digging, it turns out my Windows 98 CD image is not bootable, as it expects a boot disk. There are special directions for Easy2Boot to have it load the boot disk image with the ISO, so I tried that. And oh lovely, it worked. I went ahead to format the drive and install Windows, which was very straightforward and worked the way it should. And here it is, Windows 98. Now it's time to install drivers. Here's where things all started to go downhill. First off, I removed the sound card for the time being. It does work, but it had issues that made it unusable. Because the built-in audio on the thin client doesn't have legacy support, I'm going to drop DOS support for now. Then I ran into Windows 98 driver issues. I couldn't get the WDM sound drivers installed. Instead, I forced the installer to use VXE drivers with a command line flag. Then the display drivers, oh boy. They would install and reboot to a protection error 9 out of 10 times. Even when I got everything working, the Windows 98 experience wasn't great. The OS wasn't very stable, audio was messed up in some games, one game in particular wouldn't even launch due to a sound error, no CD audio over the USB optical drive, and Windows Explorer had a tendency to freeze. I even tried installing the updates from unofficial Service Pack 4. It made the experience worse. At that point, I was done with Windows 98. I opted to try Windows 2000, only it gave me a blue screen at the installer. Out of desperation, I tried something else, but before I reveal my final OS choice, let me show the finished setup. This is my retro computing station, which has been dominated by Apple Macs until this point. The thin client was able to easily slot between the two Power Macs. And yes, that is a vintage LCD screen from the early 2000s. It still works decently, though I've been seeking out a proper replacement. Input-wise, I'm using an Apple USB keyboard with the Microsoft IntelliMouse, an unusual combo of tech rivalries, which will be fine for now. Now it's time to boot up the OS I settled on. Hear me out on this. While Windows 98 gave me a handful of issues, Windows Millennium Edition behaved exactly the way it should. No workarounds, no protection errors, and much better stability. Not to oversell ME, it still has its issues on the thin client, which are small compared to my Windows 98 experience. I went ahead to install the unofficial cumulative update pack, Since Windows Update for ME is no longer a thing, this fixed up a few remaining issues. CD audio works now. It's about time to set up proper wallpaper. Joke aside, I would keep this unironically, only I settled on something more retro themed. After that, it's llama whipping time.
Winamp. Llama tested. Mother approved.
The software setup is not quite period correct without Winamp, complete with a visualizer. Now for the part that everyone has been waiting for, the gaming experience. The first game I tested under Windows, no joke, was Putt-Putt Saves the Zoo. Let's face it, if I had this computer as a kid, it's not sufficient if it can't run Putt-Putt. The original 1995 release had slow animation playback at some points, I'm not sure why. I tried a later Humongous release, which ran perfectly fine. Then of course, Windows ME runs Doom 95, because I wanted another excuse to run Doom. I went on to test my stack of games on hand, along with some demos and CD images. I am happy to report that most games I tested on here worked well, though a few games had audio crackling.
Three, two, one, go!
I found two ways around this. One is to bypass direct sound if the game supports it. The other involves a visit to a DirectX Diagnostics to fully disable direct sound acceleration. Although the latter option didn't quite work out for Myst Masterpiece Edition, this game takes the radical centrist approach and hates both direct sound options. With acceleration, the opening videos crackle. Without acceleration, the rest of the game crackles and stutters. It turns out the perfect solution is to bypass direct sound in QuickTime. Now this is a very minor issue I only found in a few games out of many, so not a big deal. Performance-wise, the Thin Client can handle 2D games up until the early 2000s. To my surprise, the built-in graphics feature proper support for Direct3D and OpenGL. At 640 by 480 resolution, performance has been okay. The graphics driver forces a harsh form of VSync, and I haven't found a way around it. It also feels like the driver primarily targets Quake 3, and everything else is a slight afterthought. Quake runs very smoothly. Unreal Tournament runs much worse and with some graphical bugs. On the bright side, this system can take a PCI GPU, and I might consider one for a future upgrade. Overall, how did this turn out? Well, it went in a different direction than I expected. I had to drop support for DOS due to sound card issues, and the version of Windows had an unusual change. I didn't go into this to write a paragraph-long defense of Windows ME, but here I did. I'm quite happy with how this came out. The Thin Client is now a solid Windows 9X gaming PC, perfectly capable of playing games from the mid to late 90s, in a small form factor with dead silent operation. For now, that's all I have to say for this project. To those who have made it this far, thanks for watching. I could read a list of the common YouTube calls to action, but nah. Feel free to give a thumbs up and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.